Hello everyone, this is Miss Smith, and the purpose of this video is to discuss arguing a position. Let's get started. So let's play something called the blame game. Let's say, for example, you and I were both students and we were riding together to school, okay? And let's say you were driving and I was not driving, but I was running late and you had to wait on me to leave my house that morning before we could leave. And let's say on the way to school, you got a speeding ticket. And so let's say we start arguing, and you're trying to blame me for you speeding, and I'm blaming you for your speeding. And our goal is to not let the other person get away with the blame. So in other words, whatever you're doing, you do not want to take the blame. Neither do I. And so we're trying to figure out ways to convince the other that we're right. Okay? And so in that example, it's just a little minor scenario, but it illustrates that it's something that we do every day, that being arguing. We argue every single day. Now, we may not have arguments like I talked about in that scenario every day, or we may, but we all make arguments every day. So for example, what you chose to wear this morning is an argument of who you are. The bumper stickers on your car, if you have any, may be an argument of what you value, right? What you respect. Even on your laptop, if you have stickers or different items on your laptop, that can also be an argument that you're making about things that you care about. So in various ways, we all make arguments every day, and we all know how to argue our points and pull reasons for why we are right. And so I wanted to point that out because we're going to be talking about academic argument. And this can seem a little bit daunting at first, but I want you to go into it knowing that you already know how to make an argument. You already know how to do that. Now what we're going to do is try to figure out what we need to do to make a strong academic argument. Okay, something that will be valid in a college or university setting. And so there's some differences that I want to point out between academic argument and what we would typically call persuasive writing. Okay, now we're going to use the word persuasion later on. It's going to be a big piece of our argument puzzle. So don't confuse the two. Persuasive writing is just a type of writing that is typically done, a genre of writing. But academic argument is still different from that. So with academic argument, you are making a claim that is supported by credible evidence. Okay? You're taking a position on something. You're making a claim, but your claims are supported by credible evidence. You're standing on that evidence to make your claim. With persuasive writing, your claims, your perspectives are based on your opinion, right? You're not pulling from any credible evidence. It's based on your opinion. Academic argument presents opposing viewpoints and tries to refute them. But persuasive writing may not consider opposing viewpoints or counter-arguments, okay? Because again, it's just based on your opinion. Academic argument uses proper documentation and citation methods to give credit for borrowed sources, and we will discuss MLA format as a part of this week's content as well. Whereas persuasive writing may not include proper documentation and citation because all of the information originates with the writer, right? It's all based on what you think. And so academic argument stands apart from persuasive writing. Academic argument is a higher level of writing than straight persuasive writing where you are writing solely based on your opinion. What are the key features of argument? So our book talks about this, and I want to kind of go over some of these and point them out. First, you need a clear and arguable position. That's going to be really important. You do not have a strong argumentative essay if you don't have an arguable position. So let me give you an example. An arguable position needs to make sure that there's a pro and a con to the issue, right? That you can take a stand on the issue, and that someone or some groups of someone's, right? Lots of people will disagree with your stance, right? So you can take a position on it. There will be a considerable amount of people who would be willing to disagree with you on that. That typically makes something arguable. So again, an example of that. If I were to say as my argument that cancer is bad, okay? Cancer is bad, if that's the argument I want to take. Is that an arguable position? It's not, right? It's not an arguable position because you're probably not going to find many people who are going to argue against that and say that cancer is good, okay? However, if I say that alternative medicine is better than traditional medicine for treating cancer, now is that an arguable position? Yes, it is an arguable position because there may be people who say, no, 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 traditional medicine is better than alternative medicine, right? And so you have now a position that you can take that comes with a counter argument, right? That other people may not agree with your position. And so that makes it an arguable position. And so when you select a topic for your argumentative research essay, you want to make sure that your argument is clear and that it is an arguable position. You also need necessary background information, okay? And so a lot of times when we are taking on an argumentative writing essay, we're wading into an issue that we may not know a whole lot about, but we may be interested in. So you may need to do your own research, right? Bring yourself up to speed, figure out what is that ongoing conversation with that issue so that you can figure out what position you want to take within it. And you may also need to provide that background information to the reader. So for example, if you want to argue about, I don't know, I'm going to make it up here, animal treatment, right? And animal experimentation, for example. You may need to bring the reader up to speed on what's happening with animal experimentation, right? And what the argument is, give us that background information, and then help us understand your position on it. A good academic argument will have good reasons, and so you need to find your strongest possible reasons, your strongest possible evidence, your most credible evidence to support your position on the argument, okay? And so you need good reasons to fuel what it is you think. Also need convincing evidence, and they kind of go hand in hand with that. Good reasons and convincing evidence go hand in hand, but you also definitely need a trustworthy tone. Definitely a trustworthy tone. So you want to come across in your essay as someone who knows what they're talking about, right? Who's done the research, who is well informed, and who can take an intelligent stance on the position that they've chosen to write about. And so you don't want any of your writing to sound wishy-washy. You don't want to sound uncertain. You want to make pretty confident statements about what it is you believe about that topic. Okay? And so you want to sound like you are credible and that you are informed and that you're in a position through your own research and preparation to make this argument in an intelligent manner. Okay? And you want careful consideration of other positions. That's the counter argument, right? And so again, if your position is truly arguable, there will be another side to it. There will be a counter argument to it. You take one side of the position, someone else, and ideally it's others, right? Groups of others will take the other position, right? People will disagree with you. And so you have to then understand what the disagreement is, right? What's the argument that is being made on the other side that you need to pull out just so that you can refute it, right? Just so that you can say the other side says this, however, that's not the case because, right? And so you want to make sure that you present the argument that is coming against you so that you can refute it. Now, with me saying that, I want to make sure that I'm very clear. We are writing in this assignment an argumentative essay. So your goal with the argumentative essay is to present your side of it and to persuade the reader that your side is correct, okay? That your position is the right position, the correct position. And so what you're not doing, you're not writing an informative essay. An informative essay would present all the merits of one side, all the merits of the other side, but it won't really make an argument. So whenever you're adding in that counter argument, you're adding it in just to try to help you make your argument, okay? So don't fall into the trap of writing an informative essay where you're just talking about the merits of both sides of the argument, but you're not actually making an argument for one side or the other. You must make an argument for one side or the other, okay? And so, as I was saying a moment ago, the goal of academic argument is to convince your audience to agree with your viewpoint, okay? Or at the very least, to strongly consider your viewpoint as valid, okay? Your goal is to craft a sound, well-researched argument that employs critical thinking and persuasion strategies. When we say persuasion strategies, we mean rhetoric. Okay, that's another word we can use for persuasion strategies. And you're trying to convince your audience. You're trying to persuade your audience. So your goal in this assignment is to create a research essay that is sound, that is well researched, employs critical thinking, and that is persuasive in trying to convince your audience. So let's talk about then these persuasion strategies, because there are some persuasion strategies that have existed for thousands of years that we can still use today to help us with being convincing in our essay. Okay, so again, argumentative writing aims to persuade the reader. And just again to recap, argumentative writing must focus on an arguable topic, contain credible sources and evidence, employ critical thinking, present and refute counter-arguments, maintain a good tone, a trustworthy tone, and use persuasive strategies, also known as rhetoric, to make the argument convincing to the reader. And so when we're talking about these persuasive strategies or rhetoric, rhetoric by definition is the art of speaking and writing well. Okay? Thousands of years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle coined terms, three specific terms that help us understand how to do that, how to speak well and how to write well. And it's all aimed at persuading your audience. Okay? So when we talk about rhetoric, again, we're talking about persuading our audience. How do we use certain tactics to help us persuade our audience? Now, we're not aiming for manipulation. We're not trying to manipulate people, but we're trying to figure out our best possible chances of persuading them. Okay? And so with an academic training, part of what it is you're trying to do is making sure you're doing this in an ethical manner. You're persuading in an ethical manner. You're not manipulating just for the sake of getting over on people. You're trying to make sure that you are being ethical in your persuasion tactics. Okay? And I don't want you to confuse rhetoric and rhetorical situation. We have talked about the rhetorical situation, and you need to determine the rhetorical situation in any writing assignment. Again, the rhetorical situation causes you to determine the purpose of your writing, the audience of your writing, the stance that you're taking on your writing, and also the medium in which you're communicating. The rhetorical situation frames how you will communicate. It makes you think about your audience and your tone and why you're writing what you're writing, so that you make sure that you are writing something that meets the requirements of the assignment. But when we talk about rhetoric, again, we're talking about persuasion tactics. So don't confuse the two things. So there are three common persuasive strategies that you should know, coined by Aristotle, like I said a moment ago. And they're represented by the Greek words ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos, pathos, and logos. So let's break these down in more detail. Ethos uses the credibility or character of the speaker or the author to persuade the audience. Ethos is attempting to state that I am a good person, I'm a trustworthy person, you can believe me, you can trust me, you can follow me, right? I'm a good person. And so that's the persuasion appeal of ethos. So for example, a politician talking about his humble beginnings in an effort to convince voters that he or she can relate to working class struggles, right? So the politician at this point in his or her life could be a very wealthy person, but they may be trying to go back to their humble beginnings, right? Just so that they can persuade the audience that I'm a good person. I'm a person that you can relate to. I'm a person who understands you. Okay? So that's an example of an ethos appeal to try to persuade the audience. Or for an example, a celebrity using his or her credibility to endorse a product. Okay? So we see that all the time. This is an example of ethos. Okay? So who do we have here? You probably have already figured out that this is Beyonce, right? The musician Beyonce. And she is using her credibility as a successful musician to endorse a product. This is an example of an ethos appeal. So what is it trying to say to us? It's trying to say to us, it's kind of going on the tenet that Beyonce is a successful person, that it's going on the idea that she's probably a good person, and that she's a person who values her looks, right? She values beauty. She's always in front of the camera. And so if she's using this product, then it must be a good product. If she chooses to use it, then you should choose to use it. And so it's using an ethos appeal based on this individual to try to persuade you that this product is a good product. Okay, so those are examples of ethos. Pathos uses emotion to persuade the audience, and it's essentially an appeal to the heart. And so in using emotion, it can try to persuade you to feel happy about something, to feel sad about something, to be frightened, or to feel fearful of something happening. There's a lot of different ways that that emotional appeal can be used. And the pathos appeal tends to work for a lot of people. It doesn't work for everyone primarily, but it does work for a lot of people. So let me give you an example of pathos. A billboard that shows a car after being hit by a drunk driver. I don't know if you remember, but a couple of years ago they used to have those billboards and they had parts of the wreckage of the car attached to the billboard, right? And so as you're driving down the road or riding down the road and you see this, it tends to have some type of an emotional reaction for you. Maybe you slow down a little bit, right? Maybe you were driving a little bit too fast and you slow down because, you were suddenly mindful of being involved in some type of an accident. Or maybe you felt sympathy for the person who might have been involved in that accident. Maybe you thought about a family member and was hoping that they would be safe on the roads. Okay? And so that was an example of a pathos appeal. It did something to get into your emotions to persuade the audience. Okay? And of course, we always see the commercials from bridal stores, right? Showing a happy couple on their wedding day. They're trying to attach their product to that emotion of happiness. So let's look at another example. This was an ad from years ago. This baby is probably an adult now, but it's still an effective example of pathos. Michelin, because so much is riding on your tires. And so if they just had the image of the tire in this ad, it would not have had that emotional appeal. However, when they sit a cute little baby down beside the tire, right, it pulls in that emotion, right? You begin to think, oh my goodness, so much is riding on my tire. My family, maybe my own child, right? My siblings, people I care about. I have to make sure that I have a good tire. And Michelin's persuasive tactic is that Michelin is a good tire. You can trust us. We're a good company. And it's using that pathos appeal to connect your emotions with that product. Okay? So again, we're talking about persuasive strategies. So logos is that third persuasive strategy. Logos uses logic or reason to persuade the audience, and it appeals to the head. So whereas pathos appeal to the heart, logos aims to appeal to the head, to the logic or to the reason of a person. Okay? This appeal often includes facts and figures and statistics to try to make their case. So for example, lung cancer is one of the three most common types of cancer in the United States, according to the National Cancer Institute. Okay? That's an example of logos. It's implied that the National Cancer Institute is a reputable organization. Okay? It's also implied that they have done their research. They have gathered the facts and the figures and the statistics, right? And they can make a logical assertion that lung cancer is one of the three most common types of cancer in the United States because they've done all the research, right? Because they've gathered all the information. So it's an appeal to the reader's logic. Okay, they trust the information because the information seems like it's credible. Another example is in a recent national poll, 4 out of 5 dentists prefer Bright Smile toothpaste over any other brand. We see these things all the time. Again, it's the same thing as the example before. It's trying to indicate that all this work was done, facts and figures, statistics, and it's using logic to appeal. Now, it's using logic in that, again, that there was a poll conducted among dentists, and they have chosen this, okay? And so that's an example of a logos appeal. And so let's look at an example here, okay? Unfortunately, 1 in 5 women will be a victim of sexual assault during her college years. And this comes from an ad that was created for Penn State University through their Rock Ethics Institute, okay? And so, again, we're looking at this and we're assuming that there's some research, right? That there's some statistics, there are facts and figures that have gone into the statement that they've made. It's an appeal to reason. They've done the research, they have asked the right people, they know the answer, and they're presenting it to us. Okay, they're presenting it to us. Now, I do want to point out something that I have not pointed out before. It's very possible to mix the appeals. Okay, it's very possible for something to be more than one thing. So you can have ethos and logos in the same thing, or ethos and pathos in the same thing. So for example, if we look at this ad, we see we have figures of 5 women, and it's stating clearly that 1 in 5 will be a victim of sexual assault. Now, the one here that indicates that this individual would be a victim of sexual assault, I don't know if you can see this, but it has wording in various sizes in this figure: daughter, friend, classmate, sister, girlfriend, you. Okay, and so it's trying to then appeal to your pathos, right? That emotional connection that you have with these individuals to make you convinced that this is an issue, that this is a serious issue, right? So this here is an injection of a pathos appeal, whereas this is a use of a logos appeal. Okay, and this could also be ethos. You could also make the argument, right? The credibility of these individuals in your life, just trying to, kind of pull you in, and again, that then veers back into pathos. And so they can blend, they can mix, and you as the writer of your argumentative research essay can determine the best types of persuasion strategies to use to convince your reader. Because remember, you're trying to persuade your reader. So let's look at these again. We have ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos appeals to character of the speaker or the writer. Pathos appeals to emotion or to the heart. Logos appeals to reason or logic or to the head. Okay? And so as you are writing your essay, maybe you come across in your research an anecdote, a story that drives home the point that you're trying to make about the argument that you're making. Okay? Maybe you want to include that story in your essay. That would be an example of a pathos appeal. Okay? You would be pulling information from credible people. That could be an instance of an ethos appeal. You could be using facts and figures and statistics in your research essay. That would be an example of a logos appeal. These are the 3 main ways that we can try to persuade our reader. Audiences are typically persuaded by ethos, pathos, and logos. So again, as you're working on your research essay and as you're starting your research, look for those elements of persuasion. Okay? Because ideally, you will create a research essay that you can be proud of and that you know makes your best possible argument. If you have questions, please let me know.